it was not only men who were prominent in Queen Elizabeth's court, women were also influential in her court. You can count women like Mary Herbert, that's her Mary. Who was the Countess of Pembroke? Was the Countess of Pembroke. One of the important books published at this time was Il Cortigiano. By Castellan. This book was translated by Sir Thomas Hobby in 1561. Who was translated by Sir Thomas Hobby in 1561. It was the guidebook for Elizabethan courtiers. It was a guidebook for Elizabethan courtiers. The book says that the important function of a courtier was to give good and honest advice to the prince. The book says that the most important function of a courtier was to give good and honest advice to the prince or to the king, but that those who do so may not be liked by the king. Excuse me. But that those who do so may not be liked by the king. Probably meaning that kings do not like to be told the truth. During the Elizabethan period, writers of lower status still looked to the court for grants, rewards, and titles. In the Elizabethan period, writers of lower status looked to the court for grants, rewards, and titles. but most of them were not. Most of them were disappointed. This was the particular experience of John Lilly. This was the particular experience of John Lilly. John Lilly is on the board. As noted in the following words of his, quote, "A thousand hopes, but all nothing. A thousand hopes, but all nothing." He said this when he did not get the position of master of revels. He said this when he could not get the position of master of revels. It's like saying director of entertainment. Or special advisor on entertainment. Master of revels. A thousand hopes, or nothing. At this time, Edmund Spencer wrote Madame Hubert's Tale. And Falling Clouds. Again. Falling Clouds, come again. After he was disappointed in his hope of getting court patronage. Note that these works are very critical of Queen Elizabeth's court. These two works are very critical of Queen Elizabeth's court, talking about the corruption, the hypocrisy, the sycophancy in the court. It should be noted that later in life, Edmund Spencer was able to get court patronage after writing The Fairy Queen. Of course, you know that The Fairy Queen praises the court of Queen Elizabeth. So after writing the Fairy Queen, he was finally recognized. The Queen awarded him with a pension of £50. The Queen awarded him with a pension of £50. The Queen awarded him with a pension of £50. And of course, he had some access to the court. So the court was mostly depicted as precarious, superficial, and hypocritical. The court was mostly seen as precarious place, very dangerous, very slippery. Make one mistake, you are gone. You can lose your life. Precarious, superficial, people behave on the surface. People will not sincere in their words and actions. Superficial and hypocritical. So the court was seen as corrupt. And so poets turn to the rural area to depict how it is in sharp contrast to the corruption of the court. Poets then turn to the rural areas to depict how clean and beautiful and pure the rural area is compared to the court at the city center. So this accounts for the birth of pastoral poetry. This accounts for the birth of pastoral poetry. This accounts for the birth of pastoral poetry. At this point in history, writers could not earn a living exclusively from their writing. At this point in history, writers could not earn a living exclusively from their writing. Because there was no wide readership. Because there was no wide readership. And there were not many publishers. Poetry was written as a pastime at court. Poetry was written to pass time at court by people like Sir Philip Sidney. By people like Sir Philip Sidney. This was when you had courtly writers who lived at court. Writers who could not stay in the court, writers of lower status, like Samuel Daniel or Michael Drayton. Samuel Daniel or Michael Drayton sought careers in the civil service. Went to the civil service and served as secretaries, tutors, secretaries or teachers, while others offered their work to prospective patrons in return for praise. They praised this patron and then they are rewarded. That was how writers survived at the time. It is noted that even a writer like Ben Jonson survived by patronage. It is noted that even a writer like Ben Jonson survived through patronage. Even a writer as great as Ben Jonson survived by patronage. But there were cases of patrons who did not reward their writers for dedications. As the writer would dedicate their works to these patrons and then the patrons will reward them. But there were patrons who did not reward writers for this action. So that will cause some form of disappointment. It should be noted that 2 or 3 pounds will be given to a writer for dedication. For a pamphlet or a small book of verse, 2 or 3 pounds will be given by the patron to the writer for dedicating a book. That's a pamphlet or a small book of verse to the patron. 2 or 3 pounds could be paid to the writer, could be given to the writer for dedication, for pamphlet or small book of verse. Shakespeare dedicated the Rape of Lucrece to the Earl of Southampton. The Rape of Lucrece, published in 1594, to the Earl of Southampton. And Shakespeare did not seem to have any problem with his patrons. But some other writers were not that fortunate like Shakespeare. Someone like Robert Greene, had to dedicate 17 books to 16 different patrons. There were some authors who were known for the fraudulent act of printing several different pages of dedications to different patrons to deceive them. So the problem that patrons had with their writers persisted till even up till the 18th century. The problem that patrons had with their writers persisted up to the 18th century. Can be seen in how Samuel Johnson criticized his patron after he was only recognized after he had completed the dictionary in 1755. The patron only came to recognize him after he had finished all the labor and completed the dictionary in 1755. He says, and I quote, Samuel Johnson says, and I quote, Is not a patron, my Lord, one who looks with unconcern on a man struggling for life in the water, and when he has reached ground, he encumbers him with help. Is not a patron, my Lord, someone who looks unconcerned on a man struggling for life in the water, and when he has reached ground, he encumbers him with help. I mean, when you need the help of a patron, they will not help you until when you have struggled and completed the work. So is not a patron, my Lord, who looks unconcerned on a man struggling for life in the water, and when he has reached ground, he encumbers him with help. That's what Samuel Johnson said about his patron. The final time is not a patron, my Lord, one who looks unconcerned on a man struggling for life in the water, and when he has reached ground, encumbers him with help. Encumbers is spelled E-N-C-U-M-B-E-R-S. Encumbers him with help. Writers like Samuel Daniel, and Spencer enjoyed patronage. In that time. Before the Elizabethan, you can take a paragraph. Before the Elizabethan period, universities were mostly used in training the clergy. Before the Elizabethan period, universities were only used in training the clergy. Like those who will be pastors. Universities were only used in training the clergy as those who will be pastors. But during the Elizabethan era, the universities also trained the gentry. Universities also trained the gentry and the aristocrats for public service, even though they did not take degrees. But during the Elizabethan era, universities also trained the gentry and the aristocrats for public service, even though they did not take degrees. Not graduate with degree. This brought about the phenomenon known as the university wits. W-I-T-S, university wits. This brought about the phenomenon known as the university wits. W-I-T-S. And there were a group of writers like Thomas Nash. Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, and George Peele. The university wits were Thomas Nash, Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, and George Peele. These writers gave a classical appeal to Elizabethan literature. These writers gave a universal appeal to Elizabethan literature. And their activities led to the flourishing of that literature in the 1590s. And the activities led to the flourishing of that literature in the 1590s. But the university which found it difficult to sustain themselves. But the university which found it difficult to sustain themselves. Which in the most part explains why most of them were in debt or in prison. Which explains why most of them were in debt or in prison. Okay. Someone like Christopher Marlowe died in a struggle in a bar. In a fight in a bar. In the Elizabethan period, the population of London grew, and the impact of that growth affected the city generally. The impact of that growth affected the city generally. In 1563, London had 93,250 people. In 1563, Elizabeth's time, London had 93,250 people. But in Chaucer's time, London had only 50,000 people. But in Chaucer's time, London had only 50,000 people. The printing press was in London, or the printing presses were in London, and that is where the booksellers were. The books were consumed by the elites. Especially the books of instruction. Here, the book of instruction. Books like romances, religious tracts, and conduct books were consumed by men and women. St. Paul's Churchyard was the center of the book trade in London at the time. St. Paul's Churchyard was the center of the book trade in London at the time. St. Paul's Churchyard was the center of the book trade in London. And it should be noted that the 16th century was the first century of the printed book in England. The 16th century was the first century of the printed book in England. At this time, there was no copyright. There was no copyright at this time. Authors simply sold their manuscripts outright to the publishers. Authors simply sold their manuscripts outright to the publishers. A pamphlet or a small book of poetry could go for 40 shillings. A pamphlet or a book of poetry could go for 40 shillings. A pamphlet or a small book of poetry could go for 40 shillings. There were strict laws that regulated printing and publishing. There were strict laws that regulated printing and publishing. There were strict laws that regulated printing and publishing. All books must be published in London. All books must be published in London, either in Oxford or Cambridge. Either at Oxford or Cambridge. The number of printers was limited. The number of printers was limited. Everything printed must receive the imprimatur of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London or their agents. Everything printed must receive the imprimatur of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London. Imprimatur, like saying the seal. The seal. Everything published, everything printed must receive the imprimatur of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London or their agents. Everything published must be entered on the registers of the Stationers' Company. Everything printed, published, must be on the registers right, of the Stationers' Company. It is like sending your work to the National Library after publishing it today. It's compulsory to send your work to the National Library after publishing. The strict laws were enforced by the highest authority in the land. these strict laws were enforced. So that shows that printing was highly regulated or regimented in the Elizabethan period. The strict laws were enforced by the high authorities in the land. And it was seen that these publishing laws mostly protected the publishers, not the authors. These publishing laws mostly protected the publishers and not the authors. One writer by name John Starks. Had his right hand cut off for writing a book entitled The Discovery of a Gaping God. Discovery of a Gaping God. The discovery of a gaping God. In 1579. The book protested the speculated marriage between the Queen and a French king. Something that did not even happen at the end of the day. But the man's hand was gone. The book protested the speculated marriage between the Queen and a French king. It is reported that after his right hand was cut off, he used his left hand, he lifted his left hand, he used his left hand to lift his heart and said, "God save the Queen," to show his loyalty to the Queen after his hand was cut off. Other writers went to prison. Some were reprimanded and some were investigated. So it was dangerous to write at this time. And of course, it's still dangerous to write at any time because writers are very powerful people. Okay? So it was dangerous to put pen to paper in the Elizabethan period. It was dangerous to put pen to paper in the Elizabethan period. And it was so unprofitable that it is a wonder any original writing was published at all. It was so unprofitable that it's a wonder any original writing was published at all. Despite the existence of printing press, manuscripts in handwriting still circulated up to the 17th century. Despite the existence of the printing press, handwritten manuscripts still existed till the 17th century. This means that there were professional scribes, scribes, who wrote or copied manuscripts for authors and readers. Because it was how books were published from the medieval period. The manuscripts were copied out. If you want a copy of a book, then the people who were scribes who would copy it out and you buy it. So why books were very costly at the time. Only very highly placed people could afford books. But now you can afford books, but you don't buy and you don't read. Right? What an irony. Let's look at art and nature. Art and nature. Colon. Elizabethan aesthetics. Art and nature as Elizabethan aesthetics. Art and nature constituted the Elizabethan aesthetics. As the beauty of Elizabethan literature was seen in the juxtaposition of art and nature. In Elizabethan literature, art reinforces nature. In Elizabethan literature, art reinforces nature. The literature was characterized by an intricacy of design. The literature of the Elizabethan period was characterized by an intricacy of design, elaborateness of pattern. Where Elizabethan literature was characterized by what? An intricacy of design and elaborateness of pattern. This was what was valued. This was the core of the art. These were the dances that existed during the Elizabethan period. These were the dances that existed. And the turbans, and the galleys, and the armies. They are the Saracens. Okay? If it was a time that we used to have projector, maybe we would have projected that some of the dances, but I think it should be something that you should know. I thought people were not interested in it again. Okay then. So, but you can search YouTube to find out the dances. But I think the sarabans are still popular. So every era has its dance. What dance do we have now? Okay, maybe I will just do this and see if you can just see how it looks like. Elizabethan music was contrapuntal music. Music was contrapuntal music. Contrapuntal. Elizabethan music was contrapuntal music. This means that it was composed of several independent melodies joined together. This means that it was composed of several independent melodies joined together. A good example is seen in madrigals. Example is seen in madrigals. Again, you can take to YouTube to see examples of madrigals. So the Elizabethan writers modeled their works after the ancients. The Elizabethan writers modeled their works after the ancients. After all, they were Renaissance writers. So they modeled their works after the classical writers, classical works. They respected literary traditions. They respected ancient literary traditions, but they were not slavish in their imitation, meaning that they also modified the form. They learn from this form, emulate the form, transform the form, and even surpass them where possible. So take note of that. The core notion of Elizabethan writing is that it imitated classical Greek and Roman works, but that they were not slaves in the imitation of this work. They learned from these works, emulated them, transformed them, and even surpassed them. The great writers that they imitated included the great Greek and Roman writers that the Renaissance writers imitated, or that the Elizabethan writers imitated, were Homer and Virgil for the epic, Homer and Virgil for the epic, Homer and Virgil for the epic, Theocritus and Virgil for pastoral poetry, Theocritus and Virgil for pastoral poetry, all these names we have mentioned them before in the past classes. Cicero for rhetoric and prose style, Cicero for rhetoric and prose style, Cicero for rhetoric and prose. Rhetoric and prose. Plautus and Terence for comedy. The imitated Seneca for tragedy. Seneca for tragedy. The imitated Petrarch for sonnet. Petrarch for sonnet. Sonnet. The sonnet. The imitated Ariosto and Tasso for romantic epic. And Tasso for romantic epic. The imitated Ovid for love poetry. Imitated Ovid for love poetry, as well as erotic mythical narratives, as well as erotic mythological narrative. Mythological narrative. In criticism, defense of voice by the assembly. In criticism, we have Sidney's defense of poesy as the only major work of criticism in the 16th century England. Sidney's defense of poesy was the only major work of criticism in the 16th century England. Defense of poesy as defense of poesy. Philip Sidney's defense of poesy was the only major work of criticism in the 16th century England. Other works of criticism in Europe were influenced by Aristotle's Poetics. Other works of criticism in Europe were influenced by Aristotle's Poetics. But Sidney's work is eclectic. Sidney's work is what? Eclectic. That means it takes from different traditions. Eclectic means it takes from different sources, draws from different sources. Eclectic. Draws from different sources. But Sidney's work is eclectic because it draws from several literary traditions. And states that what are important in Elizabethan literature are ideal imitation, moral teaching, and decorum. The work states that what should be considered ideal in Elizabethan literature should be ideal imitation, moral teaching, and decorum. Literature should aim to imitate the ideal, should teach moral lessons, and should have decorum. Decorum. Suddenly defines poetry as an imitation of nature. Suddenly defines poetry as an imitation of nature. Suddenly defines poetry as an imitation of nature. But he also views the poet as a creator with God. He also views the poet as a creator with God because his work reflects the work of God. Amen, somebody. Because poetry is a higher art, the poet imitates the ideal. The poet imitates the ideal and not fallen nature. Because poetry is a higher art, the poet aims to imitate the ideal and not fallen nature. Another work of English literary criticism that we must mention is Puttenham's and English and essay. Puttenham's Art of English Poesy. Art of English Poetry. From these works, we learn that the other tenets of Elizabethan art and literature are the delight in copia, The Elizabethan literature delights in copia. Latin for abundance of words. Delight in copia, abundance of words. The use of poetic figures of speech. Use of poetic figures as figures of speech. The use of ornamental language, decorative verse. The use of ornamental language. Decorative verse. The attempt to link poetry with rhetoric. Elizabethan literature was also concerned with the levels of style. Elizabethan literature was also concerned with the levels of style. That's the high style, the middle style, and the low style. The high style, the middle style, and the low style. The use of allegories. The use of allegories. And symbolic relationships. Seen in nature and in man's relationship with God and the universe. Seen in nature and in man's relationship with God and the universe. In Elizabethan literature and worldview, one is likely to come in contact with the concept of the great chain of being. The great chain of being. Which shows that everything in the universe is related in a hierarchical manner, from the greatest to the least. Everything in the universe is ranked hierarchically from the greatest to the least in that relationship. That's a great chain of being. And that everyone must remain in that position for there to be peace and stability in the world. Everybody must remain in that divinely ordained stations. Because that's where God placed him. Stay there. Don't look for trouble. Okay, let us move on to poetic convention, modes, and genres. Poetic conventions, modes, and genres. Poetic conventions, modes, and genres in the Elizabethan literature. Literary conventions are patterns that have become habitual. Literary conventions are patterns that have become habitual. Literary conventions are patterns that have become habitual and arouse certain expectations in the reader. Literary conventions are patterns that have become habitual and arouse certain expectation from the reader. Some of the Elizabethan literary conventions are pastoral. Some of the Elizabethan literary conventions are pastoral. Pastoral convention. The way convention, lyric, pastoral, heroic, lyric, satiric, ledger, tragic, and comic. Literary convention. In poetry, you have the epic, in the Elizabethan period, writers practiced the epic tradition, tragedy, sonnets, verse episode, epigram, hymn, mask, funeral elegy, and others. In your study of Elizabethan literature, you must come across these conventions. In the Greek era, Aristotle considered tragedy the noblest form of literature. In the Greek era, Aristotle considered comedy the noblest form of literature. In the Elizabethan period, epic was the best form of art. Epic was the best form of art. Pastoral was the least. Pastoral was the least. Pastoral was the least. Those who practiced the epic form were known to begin with the pastoral poetry as a way of testing their humility. Before moving on to write epic as a way of being lifted by the gods or being lifted by God. So this was the practice of writers like Edmund Spenser and John Milton in the Elizabethan period. They started by writing pastorals, which was the base, the least form of poetry, the least considered, before they rose to writing the epic as a way of having a humble beginning, right? So of having a humble beginning. So humble contentment Humble contentment was associated with the pastoral form. This was called the otim. You need to begin in your humble days so that you will not despise the days of your humble beginning in the pastoral. It's when you become a great poet writing the epic. Satirical poems were considered plain or low in style. Satirical poems were considered plain or low in style. They were mostly written in iambic pentameter, rhymed iambic pentameter couplets. They were mostly written in rhymed iambic pentameter couplets by writers like Joseph Hall. And John Marston. Joseph. Right? Yes. John Donne. John Donne was also writing satires in manuscript at this time. But of course, it's best known for metaphysical poetry. The objects of these satires were the fops. I think it's the fops, fools, self-deluded lovers, venal lawyers, toadying catchers, money-grubbing merchants, etc. The objects of these satires were fops, fools, self-deluded lovers, venal lawyers, toadying catchers, money grabbing merchants, criticized for their excesses. Some of the satires were written in epigrams in the form of martial. Some of the satires were written in epigrams. And they were mostly written in Latin. Elizabethan lyric All Elizabethan lyric poems were shorter and were concerned with high praises to God in the form of hymns. Elizabethan lyric poems were shorter and were concerned with high praises to God in the form of hymns. There were also odes. Which celebrated people and occasions. Elizabethan lyric were also odes which celebrated people and occasions. The lyric poems had exalted tone, elevated language, was emotionally charged, and had complex stanzaic forms and rich in apostrophes. Elizabethan odes or Elizabethan lyric were exalted in tone, elevated in language, emotionally charged, had complex stanzaic forms, and rich in apostrophes. They had exalted tone, elevated language, emotionally charged, had complex stanzaic structures or forms, and rich in apostrophes. I'll take that again for the last time. Elizabethan lyric had exalted tone, elevated language, was emotionally charged, had complex stanzaic forms, and rich in what? Apostrophe. Alright?
Yes.
What's apostrophe? What's apostrophe? What is apostrophe? Hello, what's apostrophe? You don't talk. What's apostrophe? Okay, what's your name? Seriously, you know the answer. Okay. Alright, that's good. So apostrophe. We have apostrophe as a punctuation mark, but we also have apostrophe as a literary device, figure of speech, in which you address an entity that is not present as if it is present and can answer and respond. Okay? So if we are, yes, so if you understand what we mean when we say that the critic has to be armed with information, with facts, before going to the literary text, then you take some of these things seriously. Because you just need to be asked, what is apostrophe, and you give the answer. And when you see in the text, you will know. Otherwise, you will just, even if there are 20 in the text, you won't see any. Alright? So as I've said, I have selected these literary terms. It's on my website. Even if you want to read every day, till you master all of them and you can identify them, it's for your own good, because that will enrich your description of literature. Just go and check just Google notes on selected literary terms. Google notes on selected literary terms and read. Okay? Let's just talk about the epithalamium. Epithalamium. As an ode that was popular in the 16th century. It was an ode popular in the 16th century. The epithalamium is a wedding song. It's a wedding song, or a poem about a wedding. The epithalamium is a wedding song, or a poem about a wedding. It celebrates a marriage. Celebrates a marriage. In case you come across it anyway, so remember that the epithalamium is an ode, it's a lyric poem, and it means a wedding song or a poem about marriage. Edmund Spencer wrote an example of epithalamium, but he entitles it epithalamium with M-I-O-N at the end, not M-I-U-M. His own is mion, M-I-O-N. The epithalamium was modeled on the works of Horace, Catullus, Pindar, and Callimachus, who were the ancient writers of the form. Remember, the Elizabethan writers modeled their works after the ancients. Then we have the sonnets. The sonnet was also a lyric genre in the 16th century. The sonnet was also a lyric genre in the 16th century. The conventions for the sonnets were established by Francesco Petrarch. Between 1304 and 1374. And then it was introduced into England by Thomas White. And Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, during the reign of King Henry VIII. In the reign of Henry VIII. That's the history of the sonnet. The Petrarchan sonnet explores the contrary states of a feeling a lover experiences as he desires and idolizes an unattainable lady. The Petrarchan sonnet, the basic theme of the Petrarchan sonnet was that it explores the contrary states of a feeling a lover experiences as he desires and idolizes an unattainable lady. It's why we normally say that the basic theme of the sonnet is unrequited love. Love that will not be returned. The Petrarchan sonnet explores the contrary states of a feeling a lover experiences as he desires and idolizes an unattainable lady. That's a lady that cannot be had. Right? In the poem, the lover praises the lady's beauty. In the poem, the lover praises the lady's beauty, her power over him, her cruelty to him, his sleeplessness, cannot sleep, the fire of his love, and the eyes of her chastity, the pain of absence, the renunciation of love, the eternity and the originality of his poem. So we take that again. In the poem, the lover, the persona, praises the lady's beauty, her power over him, her cruelty to him. Love is wicked. Sleeplessness, the fire of his love, and the eyes of her chastity, the pain of absence, the renunciation of love, as he will not love again, never love again, the eternity and originality of his poems. All right. So those are some of the things that you get from Petrarchan sonnet, in case you come across one. All right. In the course of the course, because we don't only read some. Then we have the tragic poems. We have the tragic poems. A good example of the tragic poem is the complaint. The complaint. Complaint. Okay, remember this is a noun. So you tell someone, what's your complaint? Or what's your complaint? What's your complaint? That's a verb. That would be like, let me complain to you. Whereas a noun, what's your complaint? My complaint is that any complaints. Not any complaint. Okay. Any complaint, I say no complaint. Alright? So it's the complaint. Okay? The complaint.
How can you say no complaints?
Yes, no complaint. It's a noun, no complaint. But complain is a verb. Go and complain to the principal. Right? Or if you have any complaints, go to the principal. Right? Okay. So you have the complaint, which was developed by Boccaccio. Developed by Boccaccio, an Italian writer. Complaint was developed by developed by Boccaccio, an Italian writer, and was imitated by some English writers in a work entitled The Mirror for Magistrates. The Mirror for Magistrates. In the complaints, it is typical to find the ghost of someone who fell from a high place, bemoaning his fate and warning the others. In the complaints, it's typical to find the ghost of someone who fell from a high place, bemoaning his fate and warning others around that place. Almost Gothic. Okay? A good example is Daniel's Rosary. It's in the corner line. Daniel's Rosary. Daniel's Rosary. The heroic epistle can also be a complaint. The heroic epistle can also be a complaint. The heroic epistle can also be a complaint. It is written in the form of a letter. Written in the form of a letter. It's an epistle. Epistle is letter. It's written in the form of a letter by a woman to the man that wronged her. It's written in the form of a letter by a woman to a man that wronged her. That's another form of complaint. So, Michael Drayton is noted for his complaints, for his heroic epistle. Michael Drayton is noted for heroic epistle. Then we also have the Epilion. 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 We don't call it the Epilion, we call it the short epic. Epilion, another name for Epilion is short epic. It is a short mythological narrative practiced in the Elizabethan period. Good examples are Venus and Adonis. Venus and Adonis. By William Shakespeare. And another example is Hero and Linda by Christopher Marlowe. By Christopher Marlowe. Hope you like my handwriting. Actually, my pen. There was also the epic poem. Which was used to glorify the nation and its people. There was also the epic poem, which in the Elizabethan period was used to glorify the nation and the people of the nation, to praise the leadership of the nation, because the epic is always about dignified subject matter. So it talks about the nation, the leadership of the nation, the people. It treats themes like loyalty, endurance, and virtues. A good example is Spenser's The Fairy Queen. A good example is Spenser's The Fairy Queen. You must have studied this poem somewhere along the line. Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, whose subject matter is war and love. In the poem it says, "Fierce wars and faithful loves shall moralize my son." Fierce wars and faithful loves shall moralize my son. So in this poem, Spenser invented what has come to be known as the Spenserian stanza. In this poem, Spenser invented what has come to be known as what? As the Spenserian stanza. It consists of 8 lines of iambic pentameter. The Spenserian stanza consists of what? 8 lines with the rhyme scheme ABA, BB, CBC. With the rhyme scheme ABA, BB, CBC. The Spenserian stanza consists of 8 lines of iambic pentameter with the rhyme scheme A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, and concludes with an Alexandrine. Alexandrine is spelled ALEZANDRINE. Alexandrine is spelled ALEXANDRINE. The A is written in capital initial. Alexandrine is written in capital initial. What do we mean by an Alexandrine? It means one line of 12 syllables, which rhymes with the penultimate line. So what rhyme will it be in the Spenserian stanza that rhymes ABA, BB, CBC? So what rhyme would Alexandrine be? Okay, let me take that again. The Alexandrine is a line of what? 12 syllables, which rhymes with the penultimate line. So in the Spenserian stanza that rhymes ABA, BB, CBC, what rhyme will the Alexandrine be? We have already defined it. We said that the Alexandrine is a line of 12 syllables which rhymes with the penultimate line. We said that this Spenserian stanza concludes with an Alexandrine, right? Yes. That's the last line. Concludes with Alexandrine. We describe it as having what? 12 syllables, and it rhymes with the penultimate line. Penultimate is the line that comes before it. So it will be C, because the last rhyme was C. In the Spenserian stanza, you have A, B, B, C, B, C. That's the last line. So then you now have the Alexandrine as the final line that concludes the. It will be C. Okay?
So, does it mean it's like Shakespearean sonnet that have changes?
I don't understand your question.
The last line, which is the Spenserian line, rhymes with the line before. So it's like, does it mean it's like the Shakespearean sonnet used the two last lines copyright?
You know, in the Spenserian stanza, you have eight lines. Okay. Now, in the concluding stanza, you have one extra line that is called the Alexandrine. Okay, so that's the line that takes after the rhyme of the preceding line. So whether that has a relationship with Shakespeare's sonnet or not is not so relevant, because the rhyme scheme are not really the same. It is reported, I should be noted, that Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, introduced blank verse into England in his translation of Virgil. And this was later adopted by Elizabethan writers for tragedy. And Milton also used it for his Paradise Lost. But you need to know the origin. That Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard, introduced it into England when he translated Virgil. Introduced blank verse. Blank verse has meter but has no rhyme. Blank verse has meter but has no rhyme. Was introduced into England by Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, in his translation of Virgil. It was later adopted by Elizabethan tragedy writers and Milton for his Paradise Lost. Iambic couplet was the most common verse form in the Elizabethan period. Iambic couplet was the most common verse form in the Elizabethan period. The first line has 12 syllables, and the second line has 14 syllables. The first line has 12 syllables, and the second line has 14 syllables. So the iambic couplet was the most common verse form in Elizabethan literature. The first line has what? 12 syllables. The second line has what? 14 syllables, which was known as the poetas measure. Was known as the poetas measure. Poetas measure. Because the poetry man typically gave 12 eggs in the first dozen and 14 in the second. Alright? Because the poetry man usually gave 12 eggs in the first dozen, and in the second dozen he gave 14 eggs. All right, so let's just stop there for today. We'll meet again when the sun goes up.